Welcome everybody. I'm here to talk about Bonobo, which is a kind of new library I wrote in the last year about. But first, let me introduce myself, if it works, yes. I'm Romain Dorgueil. I worked in a lot of different companies, mostly involving web development, web engineering. I've been a developer, I've been a sysadmin. I created a few companies, and now I'm advising companies in 2 accelerators. Obviously, I like grayscales. I'm making open source. I had a little fun making trapeze shapes. And here we are going to talk about data engineering. Just before I talk about Bonobo, I'm currently working for those 2 programs. We are launching the startup acceleration programs for the BNP Paribas group. We're not directly linked, we are a subsidiary, and you can discover our team of former entrepreneurs on launchpad.atelier.net. But yeah, back to the beginning. So I want to introduce, maybe this way? Okay. Kind of strange to hear itself. So today I want to talk about Bonobo, which is an ETL library in Python. So first, are you familiar with the concept of ETL? Maybe? Okay, quite a lot. Okay. Oops. Okay. So I will talk a bit about ETLs that exist on the market, why I decided to take a lot of energy and a lot of weekends to write a new library. Then I will dive you in how to use Bonobo, what it does, what it does not, and I'll talk a bit about the future plans I have for the library. So market and what is extract transform load. So definitely by looking on Google, Wikipedia says it was a popular concept in the 1970s, so it's definitely not new thing. And basically it's everywhere. There is a lot of ETLs in e-commerce websites, everything that involves stocks, catalogs, things like this. Any website that presents data, if it's not really big data, is probably using ETLs. And it's also used in marketing, and I discovered recently that in finance it was used too. All use cases that involve having multiple data stores talking about the same data, with maybe one master data, one desynchronized data, usually use some kind of ETL somewhere. So first, smaller than ETL, you have things like small automation tools. So probably a lot of you have used or heard about IFTTT or Zapier, which are 2 great services. And those services are really useful if you have really simple tasks to automate, like follow back any person that follows you on Twitter. Not that you should do that, but you can do that. If you want to send an email every time someone fills a form, an online form, and maybe add it to, I don't know, a spreadsheet, you can use Zapier. It's the best tool to do, but it's cloud only, and it's only aimed at really small tasks. Then you have the real ETL of the market, which are pretty old tools. They try to add new features and to brand themselves as big data, etc. But basically, they're all IDE based and Java based, and you'll see they look all the same about. So that's Talend Open Studio. You define blocks. You connect the blocks are data transformation. You connect the blocks together. Setting that one block output will go into another block input. And you create a big graph of all this, and you will get your data transformed like this. So I never use Clover ETL, but it looks exactly the same. And I used a lot one which is called Pentao data integration, or also known as Kettle. But yeah, the interface differs a bit. Talend is based on Eclipse. This one is probably not based on Eclipse, but it's yeah, it's exactly the same thing. Okay, so to sum up, most of the data integration tools, there is dozens of other, but most of the data integration tools I looked after, big ones are Java and IDE based. You have blocks which represent data transformation. You can configure it with a click clicodrome stuff. I don't know if it really sounds something in English. And you manage I/O flow management. You manage I/O flow by connecting the blocks together, and the ETL is handling the execution. In the Python world, there is a few libraries. Of course, there is no clicodrome visual interface things, but you have Bubbles, which is now advertised as unmaintained, and you have something called PyTL that looks like much more something close to Pandas than to really row by row. By that, I mean it's more aiming at handling tables of data and transformation of tables into other tables of data than taking the data row by row and applying some flow management to that. And of course, depending what you want to do, you can also do some kind of ETL jobs with JobLib, Dask, Pandas tools. I'm sure you all know about these amazing libraries. I'm using them too, and I think it's really not the same thing. And above this scale, you have also big data tools by Romain. I'm talking big data today. But it could handle small-scale data. Of course, I just put a few examples. But it's probably a lot of hassle and a lot of cost to build an infrastructure able to manage a big data infrastructure just to manage small data. Or you can go cloud-based, but then you won't be able to run it locally neither. So a bit of story time of why I started to code Bonobo. In the last company I co-founded with people. We were doing something called Web2Store, which basically is taking online clients to offline world. So you're presenting things about retail, and you say, hey, it's amazing, but you can get the product in the shop, in the retail shop directly, so go there. And so we started with Pantao and made something like this. It's not the actual transformation, it's a capture I got on Google Image. But it was looking, maybe you cut the screen in two, and that was our transformation. You had to get the catalog, you had to get the images, you had to get all the taxonomies like size, colors, categories of product, make reconciliation with our own database to be sure that we show something consistent. And that's a lot of things, and ETLs, even if they have little graphic blocks, are really verbose, in fact. They're really verbose because I think the Java language asks for a lot of casting and a lot of type checks and a lot of things to make sure that your transformation is there, and you find that in the blocks. But the real problem was that at one point we got 5 more partner deals, and so basically I did that. Because all the partners were kind of similar, but they were kind of different, and I had something in programming that was like extending an object, a class, that wasn't existing in the IDE. So the naive solution was to copy-paste the thing, and at one point you have some improvement to make, whether it bug fixes or new features, because you change your referential, you're just getting like crazy. So what I really wanted was a data integration tool like the one I knew, like Pantao, but using code as configuration, preferably Python code for no real good reason except the fact I liked to write Python. Something that I can test automatically, and that can, oh, this image is not looking great. Something that can use object-oriented programming and that I can use both in my laptop, really fast to install, and on servers. And that was not Bonobo at the time, that was another library wrote for Python 2.7, but today basically it's the concept that brought Bonobo. It's the same concept as all ETL, but for coders. And it's for Python 3, and especially 3.5, and more for reasons because there is syntactic sugar I want to use directly in the library, and after a lot of years using Python 2.7, I said, okay, goodbye Python 2. It's not Pandas or R, it's not a data analysis tool, it's not statistic tool, it's not a data visualization tool, it's not Dask, it's not asking you to create the graphs manually and create the computation graphs with the dependencies. I had a punchline with Airflow because there was a conference planned just before, but this is too bad. But Airflow and Logi are amazing libraries, especially Airflow, but the directed acyclic graphs that they make in Airflow is not the same as the one in Bonobos, we'll see later. Airflow is amazing to manage a lot of tasks that depends all on the others. It's a GNU make for the clusters, something like this. I'm not an expert, but I understand it's like this. While Bonobo managed only one task. It's not big data, I always said that, and you'll see it's not a monkey, it's an ape. I should have known that because all my marketing is now criticized. So let's see a bit of code. To create a project, today we have to install, I hope everybody can read, even in the back. But today you have to install Bonobo and Cookie Cutter, which is used, if you don't know, it's a simple project that uses templates to build project skeletons. Then you can use it directly with Bonobo init, creates the PyParis directory, and if I enter PyParis directory, you have a bunch of files, nothing really big. The biggest file is 300 bytes. But you have a working example that is just ready for you. And if I run this example, it doesn't do anything really useful. It takes all numbers from 0 to 41 and just yields the odd numbers. It also displays statistics of each blocks that add inputs and outputs. So you can, with bigger transformation, you can see what happens in real time. So if we write it without looking at the code, basically it's importing Bonobo, creating something that yields every number from 0 to 41, a function, a regular Python function. It's really important that it's just regular objects. That just yields the input if it's odd and ignore if other, and we have a wrapper which is basically print. Then you can create a bonobo.graph structure. Here it's a linear graph that connects extract to transform and to load, but there is also an add chain method that can create basically any kind of acyclic graph. Well, directed acyclic graph, because you can have cycle, but not if the rows connect together. So you can create any kind of graph. You can, if you want, add the main block, which run the thing, or you can use Bonobo run, which will just find the graph instance and does that for you with a little bit more candies. You could have just directly use the range instead of extract. You can have you can use bonobo.filter, not a regular Python filter because it's not based on the same thing, but you can use bonobo.filter to filter that, and you can use directly print instead of that. So the same graph could have been written just like this. Maybe a matter of style. I like to have explicit thing, but you can write the same thing in 5 lines here. So what happened behind the scene? Sorry. So bonobo.graph is just a very simple and naive data structure to represent graphs, and you can, for example, insert this. So it stores nodes, and it doesn't change your nodes, it just stores it, and it connects it with edges, and that's it. When you run this graph, or in a shell bonobo run main.py, for example, it takes the bonobo.run method is creating an executor which has a strategy object which chooses how the nodes should be run. By default it uses, and I think it's only available today, but by default it uses a thread pool to execute every node. And it has so this strategy adds a few things. So it adds a context to handle everything that is related to the state of an execution. You don't have to see it, and you won't see it normally, but there is a context object that stores all the states of the execution for the node. And there is a thread that is used to isolate the execution of each node. And between the thread, there is a queue.queue object that is used as a first in, first out thing for inputs and outputs. So that's what really happened behind the scene when you run something. So what can we use as transformations? We can use regular functions, as said before. Regular function has one input to one output. It's not very interesting because you can just use, for example, tools.pipe if you have only functions and in a linear way. But if you have non-linear graph, or if you have something like generators, it gets much more interesting because then the number of input and output at each stage is not the same. So it supports generators, it supports iterators, which obviously doesn't have inputs, but you can use an iterator as an extractor, so as something in the beginning of a graph. And you can also have class-based transformations, and we have it's not required to use configurable, but because I just need something that can be called. So if you implement __ call on any objects, you can add it in the graph. But there is a configurable base class that you can use to specify options, which are basically something the constructor can take, and services, which is symbolic names that that represent external services, and you will be able to provide the implementation at runtime only. It's very interesting because it allows not to keep any states in the transformation itself, and the executor will get the real implementation for database.default and pass it to call, so you can use actually an external service. It's very important because that's one of the key points that make your transformation testable, because you can mock that or do anything like you would do with regular code without tying the transformation to one database implementation. So that's called services here, and the way you provide the implementation of those services is that you define a getServices function, which returns a dictionary. That was the simplest implementation I could find to how will we provide the implementations. And you can put this getServices method either just next to the graph or in _services.py, so you can have the same service implementation for all the directory. And that also means that you can provide a different services.py file on your laptop, on your pre-production, on your production, etc. Because you probably, well, whatever you can't manage with environment variables, and you should use environment for all configuration, API keys, etc. If you need to change, for example, the factory for one client, you should change it in services.py. Oops. So run will handle the injection. It's not really dependency injection because we provide a dumb dictionary and everything is instantiated every time. But as it implements the dictionary interface, you can replace that with something much more evolved. That's not the topic of Bonobo, but it's possible. So to get back here, we would have defined in the dictionary a database.default equals whatever you want, and you will get it as first parameter to your call method. Of course, if it doesn't extend configurable, you have to implement it as __ call, but here you can just call it call. And Bonobo, love bananas. I'm not sure about that. I was not sure about monkeys and apes, so I'm really not sure about bananas, but let's say it's not really important. So there is some kind of standard library that doesn't do a lot, but you can read files, write files, I mean like text files, line by line. You can read and write CSV, you can read and write JSON, you can read and write pickle, thanks to our first contributor that just committed something like a few weeks ago. You can limit whatever passes stream, so you can say, okay, drop whatever comes after the 10 first elements. You can display things in the console. And Of course, you can implement whatever you need for your own case. It's not really the topic of Bonobo to read CSV because there is something in the standard library. So it's more example. It's more like examples more than real standard library. And we have filters too. That is a bit special because you can either use it as a filter that will create a subclass of filter called non-shell path, or you can use it directly as a constructor using a lambda as a parameter. But yeah, implementation details. And we also have two things called extensions and plugins. Extensions are basically something I didn't want to put in Bonobo, so I put it in another repository, and it's another Python package. We use setup entry point, setup tools entry point to extend like the CLI, etc. But it's basically another Python package. I'll show a few after. And we have plugins. Plugins are basically that. So I'm sorry, we don't. It's a bit dark, but you could see normally here all the statistics of a transformation that has, a job. There was 1, 2, 3, like 10 transformation connected together. It was non-linear. So you can see input outputs, and that's implemented by a plugin, which is activated just because you run the thing from an interactive terminal. It integrates with Python logging. It integrates a bit with Jupyter, with this little IP widget that shows also in real time. When you run it, you will see the numbers move. Of course, it needs to be improved. In the future, I hope that we will have something based on GraphViz to display it graphically, but for now, that does the job. It's not really, I'm not really confident about this one, but we're starting to have an SQL Alchemy extension to access SQL databases. I will drink a bit of water. Sorry. We have a Docker extension that adds runC command, which is the same command as run, but you can just run a job in a container. And except if you're doing some really strange stuff, it should work. Probably not if you have strange requirements or things like this, but if you specified all your requirements within your the directory of your job, it should install the missing requirements in the container before it runs your jobs. And there is also in this extension an image builder that is used to build the base image on the Docker repository every time. So that's all for the bananas. So as I said before, it was another library with a much less sexy name. I used it from 2013 to 2015, and mostly today it's still working, and I still have a few jobs, but I don't code anymore with that. And it's a very, very, very young project, so don't expect it to be fully stable, or don't expect it to be to not introduce backward incompatible things from time to time. I try to avoid this as much as I can, but sometimes it can be avoided. The plan is to keep that 100% open source and as much as I can. And it should only focus on building graphs and executing them the most efficiently possible. So now the real focus is to have a stable API that can be called 1.0. And the really important thing is that it should be fun, and it should be easy for me to write transformations. So if there is complexity, it should be hidden in this thing and not in the transformation. After 1.0, there is a lot of subjects, mostly monitoring, debugging, scheduling, everything, finishing with Hing, and probably more execution strategies. For now, it's decoupled in a separate class, but it uses threads. So for those who were in the amphitheater just next here, it's not the best solution to have really efficient usage of CPU. But for now, it does the job, and it does it pretty well. And in general, when I have a real bottleneck in performance, it more comes from, for example, a transactional database system, because there will be locks and there will be transactions that block one other. So in fact, most of the transformation does nothing, and by nothing, it's really nothing, not like iterating like crazy. So most of the time. So for now, the bottlenecks for me are more like database systems than the real execution. But of course, it's a problem, so I need to look into that. Just funny thing, I accidentally got featured on the first page of Hacker News. I was like sandwiched between Debian release and the industry of wine power in USA of I don't know how many millions. So I was, wow, you're really crazy. And the comments were really interesting because most people either said I'm a complete ignorant about bonobos, and that's probably very true, or they complained about Pandas documentation, making me think that I was really not making my point because it's not at all a data analysis and statistical analysis tool. But it was really frightening to just leave for a coffee and come back, light the screen and say, whoa, I had like 10 visitors for the last 3 months and now there is 200 permanently. No, not normal. But after 24 hours, don't worry, it came back to 0. I think I speak much faster here than when I tried, but my end goal is to create data processing for humans. I'm probably not really near that. But maybe if you want to help or know people that want to help, we can achieve that. You can find the website bonobo-project.org. All the other links are linked. And I really need to know what you think, so we'll have probably 10 minutes for questions. And I'd really need you to go to this little form, which is also, it's the same link, but that's the human version and that's the computer version. And if you can just tell me just your raw opinion about that. If you love it, tell it. If you hate it, tell me also. It's really useful to have feedback about that. Thank you very much.